Hi there, I'm Linda and this is Huttons Valley Permaculture. I'm out of my gluten-free bread at the moment, so it's time to make some more. One of my viewers has requested that I show you how I do this. So, Everview Homestead, this one's for you. Now, anyone who has ever done any gluten-free cooking knows that recipes involve a lot of ingredients, and this recipe is no different. I'll link the recipe down below in the description to the one that I use online, but I have made some modifications which not only simplifies the process, but I think it makes a slightly tastier loaf. So I'll explain the changes as I go along. I like to prove my bread mix in the microwave. Now, I don't use my microwave so much these days. I'm trying to wean myself off it because I know they're not great for you, but I still like to use it for this purpose. So all I do is heat up a mug of water just for a couple of minutes, just to create a really steamy environment. And that creates a perfect temperature to rise your bread. So I always do that before I get my mix going, so it's ready to go straight into. The pan I put the bread mix into is this one here. It's 24 centimetres long and about 11 centimetres wide. Now, it's an old pan that is aluminium, so I do like to use some baking paper. So I line that first and then we can get going with the recipe. I don't worry too much about all the crinkles at the ends. It kind of makes for a rustic looking loaf. Okay, so that's all done, and now I can get on with getting all my ingredients out. Before I get out all the ingredients, I get everything I need. So I've already got the pan ready. You just need a large mixing bowl. You need just about your whole set of measuring cups except for the 1/3. A couple of spoons for measuring ingredients and a good sturdy one for a quick stir of the ingredients, and some measuring spoons. I've got a 20ml, a 10ml and a 2.5ml, and that's all you need. And then I just set myself up with my online recipe so that we're right to go. Before I get measuring out any ingredients, I will get them all out of the pantry and line them up in the same order that they appear in the recipe. In this way, if you do get distracted, phone calls, someone dropping by, whatever, you know exactly what you've put in and what still needs to be added. That's not walnuts. I use a gluten-free plain flour instead of the white rice. I just find it gives a nicer tasting loaf. And I also prefer to use almond meal instead of the millet flour that's listed in the ingredients. And I do use potato flour. I've got an instant dried yeast, which I find works really well, and I do a bit of a change to the recipe in regards to the yeast. And just for ease, I use sugar instead of honey. And now I can grab out my wet ingredients, which it's not a Chardonnay, but it's actually an apple cider vinegar that I made, so we need some of that. I've got my 3 egg whites already out. The choice of oil is up to you. I just use an olive oil because I have that in bulk. So here it all is, all ready to go. Now, one of the substitutes, I like to use a gluten-free plain flour, which is actually this White Wings brand. Now, if you can't source this brand, just use whatever gluten-free flour you have, or try the rice flour that they list in the recipe, and you might like that flavour. I just prefer it using this plain flour that I have. In the recipe, you'll find that they prove the yeast separately to everything else. But what I do, just check your yeast is an instant, well, I'm using an instant dried yeast. And I find that I just put that and the sugar all in with all the dry ingredients and then add the warm water to the mix. And I find that that rises sufficiently. So it's one less step. I also don't mix it with a mixer. I only stir it briefly in the bowl and it turns out great every time. All we need to do now is just put all our ingredients into the bowl. First of all, we need a cup of the gluten-free flour or the rice flour if that's what you're using, or whichever one you decide. Now I tend to get very messy while doing this, so don't worry about it too much. Okay, so it's 1 cup of gluten-free flour and I just get that one out of the way. Then we've got 3/4 of a cup of the tapioca flour. And add that one to the bowl as well. And just pop that to one side. And then just keep moving along the line. So another 3/4 of a cup of potato flour. Pop that in. That's 3/4 of a cup of the potato flour. Now we just need 1/2 cup of almond meal. And pop that in the bowl. Just need 1/4 cup of the flaxseed. Pop that in your bowl. So now we've got the xanthan gum. The recipe is 2.5 teaspoons. So this spoon is a 2 teaspoon spoon. And 1/2. A teaspoon of baking powder. Ooh, over here. And you need a teaspoon of salt. One of the changes that I've made to the recipe is just adding the yeast and the sugar straight in with the dried ingredients. So we need a 2.25 teaspoons. So this is a 2 teaspoon spoon. I just do a heap spoon and it's fine. And finally, for the dried ingredients, we probably don't forget at that point. And finally, for the dried ingredients, we add in 2 tablespoons of sugar. So that's all our dried ingredients. What I like to do at this point is just clean up a bit, get all these ingredients out the way, and then continue. So just a quick wipe up now, saves getting it all over myself. Okay, that's better now. We've got all our dry ingredients in the bowl, so we just have to give that a bit of a stir. Make sure that's well mixed together before adding any wet ingredients. Just continue until it's all evenly mixed. Okay, now we start adding our wet ingredients. So we've got those here. In go the 3 egg whites. And the recipe calls for 5 ml, so 1 teaspoon of your apple cider vinegar. So in that goes. And finally, we need 1/4 cup of the oil of your choice. Right, so that's all in. So at this point, we just need to add in 1 1/4 cups of lukewarm water. I just use water straight out of the tap. And in they go. Okay, so all we need to do is just give this a quick stir just to make sure all the lumps are mixed in well and there's no lumpy bits of flour. I can't be bothered getting out a mixer to get this mixed when all you need to do is put a bit of arm power into it. So that's about all it needs. Just make sure you've got no lumps of flour left, and that's good to go. So if you're new to baking gluten-free, it's a lot quicker than traditional wheat flour baking, because you only have to do one rise. Now this has got baking powder in it as well, so it's kind of got a double rising agent. It's got the yeast and also that baking powder that gives it a bit of extra lift. So I just spread that out in the loaf. It's quite sticky, but you get there. And when you're happy with how it looks, I'm just going to pop it in the microwave to stay warm and rise. But just pop it anywhere where you've got a warm place that's draft free. Okay, so my microwave's nice and warm. You can see the condensation there. Inside it's really warm feeling, so this bread will rise beautifully in there. I do sometimes cover that over just with another sheet of baking paper to stop any moisture getting down onto the surface. But we'll leave that for say half an hour and come back and it should be risen nicely. We just want it to rise up to the top of the tin, because in the oven it will rise a little bit more. So we'll just check and see how we're going. Yep, it's just about there, so I'll get my oven going. So you need to have your oven on 180 degrees, or that's 350 Fahrenheit. And I use my fan bake setting. Now, the loaf has risen. You don't have to have it too far above the lip. The baking powder will cause it to rise a little bit more, so that's ready to go into the oven now. 30 minutes into cooking, and we need to just cover the top of the loaf to stop it browning too much, but it's looking very good at this point. So we just pop that on. That's just a piece of foil that I just reserved for this use actually. And back in the oven for another half an hour. Okay, our bread should be ready now. It's been in the oven for about an hour. And, oh, looks great. I'm going to let that cool completely before we slice that up. Here we are. Our loaf is all ready now. It's nice and cool. And I find that the gluten-free bread is best on the first day. It's really fresh and lovely and great for sandwiches because it doesn't break up. After that, well, on day one, I will slice it all up and then I'll freeze it like that. And then I just grab it from the freezer to use. I don't like to thaw it and then use it for a sandwich because I do find it does still break up a little bit. But if you warm it straight from the freezer, like straight into a toaster, it's great, or fry it in a frying pan and just warm it like that straight from frozen, and it seems to be much better than if you've let it thaw and then used it. Now the recipe I do use for gluten-free pizza bases, where I would spread it as thinly as I can on a tray and bake that first before adding the toppings and then back into the oven. I also have made little gluten-free bread rolls before, which turn out really nicely as well. This bread here, I have baked it when I've had guests over and just served it with soups and things, and people find it delicious. Even if they're not needing to have a gluten-free diet, they still really enjoy this bread. So I recommend you making it. Now, if you give it a go, please let me know down in the comments, and if you've enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up and consider subscribing if you haven't already. As a special treat on bake days, I like to take a slice from the end, a nice thick crusty slice, and just pop a bit of jam on that. But you can see it's really lovely and soft. and it's just delicious. Bit of marmalade today. It's really good. Thanks again for watching, and bye for now.